The fluorescent lights of courtroom 7B in the Los Angeles Superior Court cast harsh shadows across the polished wooden benches, creating an atmosphere more suited to criminal trials than employment disputes. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded in front of me, feeling the weight of 34 years pressing down on my shoulders like a lead blanket. My name is Frank Castellano, and at 61, I was fighting for more than just a wrongful termination settlement. I was fighting for my dignity, my legacy, and the truth about what I had built with my own hands over 3 decades of dedication. Across the aisle sat Derek Morrison, 32 years old, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. As the new CEO of Morrison Construction, the company that bore his family name but that I had transformed from a struggling local contractor into a multi-million-dollar empire, he radiated the kind of confidence that comes from inherited privilege and unearned authority. The irony wasn't lost on me. 34 years ago, I had been hired by Derek's father, William Morrison, as a junior foreman. I had worked my way up through sheer determination, innovation, and an understanding of construction that went beyond textbooks and business degrees. I had designed the systems, built the relationships, and created the reputation that made Morrison Construction synonymous with quality and reliability. Now, Derek's lawyers were preparing to argue that I was nothing more than a disgruntled employee who had outlived his usefulness. They had no idea that my daughter Maria was sitting in the gallery behind me, quietly taking notes and preparing to defend the man who had taught her that integrity was worth more than comfort. The trouble had started 18 months ago, when William Morrison passed away and Derek inherited control of the company. I had expected some changes. New leadership always brings fresh perspectives. What I hadn't expected was the systematic dismantling of everything I had built over 3 decades. Derek arrived with an MBA from Wharton and ideas about modernizing operations and optimizing human resources. He surrounded himself with consultants half his age who spoke in acronyms and measured success in quarterly reports rather than the quality of work or the satisfaction of clients who had trusted us for decades. The first sign of trouble came when Derek announced that all senior management positions would be re-evaluated to ensure they aligned with the company's new strategic vision. I had been vice president of operations for 12 years, overseeing projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars, maintaining relationships with clients who specifically requested our services because they trusted my expertise. But in Derek's vision, experience was a liability. He wanted dynamic leadership and innovative thinking, code words for young, cheap, and compliant. One by one, my colleagues who had built their careers alongside mine were offered generous early retirement packages, or found themselves reassigned to meaningless positions until they quit in frustration. I had tried to work with Derek, really tried. When he suggested implementing new project management software, I learned it despite being perfectly capable with our existing systems. When he proposed restructuring our client communication protocols, I adapted my methods that had successfully managed relationships for decades, but nothing was ever enough. In meetings, Derek would interrupt my presentations with comments about legacy thinking and outdated approaches. He would assign projects I had designed to younger managers, then take credit when they succeeded using my blueprints. When clients specifically asked for me, he would suggest they give the next generation a chance. The final insult came 6 months ago when Derek announced my transition to an advisory role, a meaningless title with no authority, no projects, and a desk in a corner office that felt more like exile than employment. That's when I decided to fight back. Your Honor, Derek's lead attorney, a sharp-dressed woman in her 30s named Rebecca Walsh, stood to address the court. This case is simply about a disgruntled employee who cannot accept that the construction industry has evolved beyond his outdated methods. Judge Patricia Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s who had built her career on fairness and attention to detail, looked up from the case files spread before her. Ms. Walsh, please present your opening argument. Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff, Frank Castellano, was employed by Morrison Construction for 34 years. During that time, he was adequately compensated for his services and given numerous opportunities for professional development. However, as the industry modernized and the company adapted to new technologies and methodologies, Mr. Castellano became increasingly resistant to change. I felt my jaw clench as Walsh painted me as an obstinate relic clinging to the past. Around the courtroom, I could see Derek nodding approvingly at his lawyer's characterization. The defendant, Derek Morrison, inherited a company that needed significant modernization to remain competitive. Mr. Castellano's inability to adapt to new systems, his resistance to innovative approaches, and his increasingly hostile attitude toward younger colleagues made his continued employment untenable. Walsh walked closer to the judge's bench, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering an inevitable verdict. Your Honor, this is not a case of age discrimination. This is a case of an employee who simply could not keep up with the demands of a modern workplace. My attorney, David Chen, a man in his 40s who specialized in employment law, stood to object. Your Honor, the plaintiff's record speaks for itself. 34 years of exemplary service, 0 disciplinary actions, and a track record of successful project completion that is unmatched in the industry. We'll address Mr. Castellano's past performance, Walsh continued smoothly, but the relevant question is whether his recent performance justified his continued employment, and the evidence will show that it did not. Derek leaned back in his chair with the satisfaction of someone who believed victory was assured. He had no idea that the evidence was about to tell a very different story. When Derek took the witness stand, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged by anyone who mattered. His testimony was polished, rehearsed, and devastating in its casual dismissal of my contributions. Mr. Morrison, Walsh began, can you describe the challenges facing Morrison Construction when you assumed leadership? Derek adjusted his tie and looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, the company was struggling with outdated systems, inefficient processes, and resistance to modernization. We were losing contracts to competitors who had embraced new technologies and innovative approaches. And Mr. Castellano's role in these challenges? Frank represented everything that was holding us back, Derek said, his voice carrying the authority of inherited privilege. He was stuck in the past, unable to adapt to new methodologies, and frankly, his presence was demoralizing to younger employees who wanted to innovate. I watched the judge's expression carefully, but her face remained neutral as Derek continued his character assassination. Can you give specific examples? Walsh prompted. Derek's smile was perfectly calibrated for maximum impact. Frank consistently opposed the implementation of new project management software, claiming his old-fashioned methods were superior. He resisted our efforts to streamline operations, arguing that relationships were more important than efficiency. He even told one of our young engineers that experience trumps education every time. The way Derek delivered that last line made it sound like heresy rather than wisdom. I could feel my hands trembling with suppressed anger as he reduced 34 years of dedication to a series of character flaws. In your professional opinion, Walsh continued, was Mr. Castellano's termination justified? Derek looked directly at me for the first time since taking the stand, his eyes cold and dismissive. Your Honor, Frank Castellano was deadweight. He was useless to our modernization efforts and actively harmful to company morale. Terminating his employment was not just justified, it was necessary for the survival of the company. The word useless hit me like a physical blow. 34 years of building, creating, and innovating reduced to a single cruel dismissal. I could feel every eye in the courtroom on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public humiliation. Useless, Derek repeated, his voice gaining confidence as he saw no immediate objection from my attorney. Your Honor, the construction industry is evolving rapidly. We need leaders who understand technology, who can adapt to changing market conditions, who can inspire a new generation of workers. He gestured dismissively in my direction. Frank represents the old guard, well-meaning perhaps, but fundamentally incompatible with the demands of modern business. His methods were slow, his thinking was rigid, and his inability to embrace change was costing us contracts. Walsh nodded approvingly. Can you quantify the impact of Mr. Castellano's resistance to modernization? Absolutely, Derek replied, pulling out a tablet with the kind of theatrical flair that suggested this moment had been carefully rehearsed. In the 6 months since Frank's departure, our project completion times have improved by 23%. Our client satisfaction scores have increased by 18%, and our profit margins have grown by 31%. The numbers hung in the air like accusations. I could see some members of the gallery nodding, impressed by Derek's apparent success. But I knew the truth behind those statistics. They represented projects I had designed, systems I had implemented, and relationships I had built being managed by people who were simply executing my blueprints. Furthermore, Derek continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a final verdict. Frank's presence was actively damaging to company culture. Younger employees felt intimidated by his constant references to how we used to do things. His resistance to new ideas created a toxic environment that stifled innovation. My attorney finally stood to object. "Your Honor, these are unsubstantiated character attacks." "Sustained," Judge Rodriguez said, but the damage was already done. Derek's smile was triumphant as he continued. "The bottom line, Your Honor, is that Morrison Construction is thriving without Frank Castellano. We're more efficient, more profitable, and more innovative than we've ever been. The evidence speaks for itself. He was holding us back. I sat there, feeling the weight of public humiliation pressing down on me like a physical force. 34 years of dedication, of building something meaningful, of creating value that extended far beyond profit margins, all of it dismissed as worthless by someone who had inherited everything I had helped create. That's when I heard movement behind me. I turned to see my daughter Maria standing up in the gallery, her face flushed with anger and her eyes blazing with the same determination that had driven me to build something lasting. "Excuse me, Your Honor." Maria's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade, clear and strong despite the tremor of emotion I could hear beneath her professional composure. "I request permission to address the court." Judge Rodriguez looked surprised. "Ms. Castellano, you're not listed as a witness in this proceeding." "Your Honor." My attorney David Chen stood quickly. "Maria Castellano is a licensed structural engineer and former employee of Morrison Construction. Her testimony is directly relevant to the defendant's claims about the plaintiff's contributions to the company." Derek's confident expression faltered slightly as he looked at Maria with obvious confusion. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. I'll allow it," Judge Rodriguez decided. "Ms. Castellano, please approach the witness stand." Maria walked forward with the kind of purposeful stride I recognized from watching her navigate construction sites since she was old enough to wear a hard hat. At 32, she had built her own successful engineering firm, but she had learned her foundation from watching me work, from understanding that construction was about more than just buildings. It was about creating something that would last. "Ms. Castellano," David Chen began, "what is your relationship to the plaintiff?" "Frank Castellano is my father," Maria said, her voice steady and professional. "But more importantly, he's the man who built Morrison Construction into what it is today." Derek's lawyer immediately objected. "Your Honor, this is clearly biased testimony from a family member." "Overruled," Judge Rodriguez said firmly. "Continue, Ms. Castellano." Maria turned to face Derek directly, her eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Mr. Morrison, you just called my father useless. You said he was dead weight, that he was holding back the company. But you have no idea what you're talking about." The courtroom was completely silent now, everyone sensing that something significant was about to unfold. "You want to talk about the systems that improved your efficiency by 23%? Maria's voice grew stronger with each word. "My father designed those systems 15 years ago. You want to talk about the client relationships that increased your satisfaction scores? My father built those relationships over decades of honest work and reliable service." Derek's face was beginning to pale, but Maria wasn't finished. "You mentioned profit margins improving by 31%. That's because you're executing projects using blueprints and methodologies that my father developed. You're not innovating. You're copying his work and taking credit for it." She pulled out a folder from her briefcase, her movements precise and deliberate. "I have here documentation of every major project Morrison Construction has completed in the past 5 years. Every single one was based on systems, processes, or relationships that Frank Castellano created." Derek's lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear, but Maria continued relentlessly. "The Morrison Medical Center that won the State Architecture Award? My father designed the structural approach. The downtown renovation project that came in 20% under budget? My father developed the cost-saving methodologies. The client retention rate that you're so proud of? Those clients specifically requested to work with Morrison Construction because they trusted Frank Castellano." She turned to address the entire courtroom now, her voice carrying the conviction of absolute truth. "You want to know what's useless, Mr. Morrison? Useless is inheriting a company and pretending you built it. Useless is taking credit for other people's innovations. Useless is calling the man who created your success dead weight, when you wouldn't know how to run that company without the foundation he built." The silence that followed was profound and transformative. The silence in the courtroom stretched on, heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken. Derek sat frozen in the witness stand, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Judge Rodriguez was studying the documents Maria had presented, her expression growing more serious with each page. "Ms. Castellano," the judge said finally, "these documents appear to show a pattern of systematic appropriation of the plaintiff's work and methodologies." "That's exactly what they show, Your Honor," Maria replied. "My father didn't just work for Morrison Construction, he built it. Every innovation Derek Morrison claims as his own success was actually created by the man he just called useless." Derek's lawyer was frantically shuffling papers, clearly unprepared for this revelation. "Your Honor, we object to these unverified documents. These documents are from Morrison Construction's own project files," Maria interrupted. "They're signed by company executives, dated, and completely verifiable. They prove that Frank Castellano was the architect of every system that Derek Morrison now claims as evidence of his own success." Judge Rodriguez set down the papers and looked directly at Derek, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Mr. Morrison, do you have any response to these allegations?" Derek opened his mouth, but no words came. The polished confidence, the inherited authority, the casual dismissal of my contributions, all of it crumbled in the face of documented evidence. "Your Honor," my attorney David Chen stood, "the evidence is clear. Mr. Castellano wasn't terminated for poor performance or inability to adapt. He was terminated because Derek Morrison wanted to take credit for his innovations without having to share recognition with their actual creator." 6 weeks later, I stood outside the courthouse holding a settlement check that would ensure my comfortable retirement. But more importantly, I held a court order requiring Morrison Construction to publicly acknowledge my contributions to the company's success. As Maria and I walked down the courthouse steps, she squeezed my arm. "Dad, I'm sorry it took a courtroom for people to hear the truth about what you built." I smiled, feeling a pride that had nothing to do with money or vindication. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by the people who love us most. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever watched someone you love be dismissed or undervalued because of their age, please share this video. Sometimes the most powerful testimony comes not from lawyers or experts, but from family members who know the truth about what we've built with our own hands. Subscribe for more stories that remind us that experience isn't obsolete. It's the foundation upon which everything else is built. Remember, behind every useless older worker is often a lifetime of contributions that younger leaders take for granted. Your legacy matters. Your experience has value, and sometimes it takes someone who loves you to make sure the world knows it.